I wanna be great like Sikorsky, but not dead. Living inside the curve is my butter and bread. Getting paid per diem so I can eat my meals for free. I'm gonna dress my ass in some cargo pants and get front door key to the precision mansion. Fly across the country so long and there's nowhere to be. I'm gonna trade my life for boredom and pain. I cut my hair and change my name, 'cause we're all just one fly big choppers cruising high over houses and above cars. The pitch pulls easy and the engine runs sweet. We'll all stay skinny 'cause we can't afford to eat, and we'll hang out in the coolest bars, but we won't be drinking 'cause it's in the cars. The snake tail road against us hypnotized. Everybody's got the massive memorized, and hang out in the pies lounge where the computers and the food scrounge. Every inspector with an evil smile. Everybody's got flight service on speed dial. Well, hey, hey, on a flight chopper, dodging power lines, flying over towers. Students trying to kill us, but we're building ours. Teachers on the ground in the men's bathroom. Maybe sleep one night in the tailroom. But we all just one fly big choppers cruising high over houses and above the cars. The pitch pulls easy and the engine runs sweet. We'll all stay skinny 'cause we can't afford to eat it. We'll hang out at the coolest bars, but we won't be drinking 'cause it's in the cars. We'll stick the tailroad against us hypnotized. Everybody's got the massive memorized, and we'll hide out in the pies lounge with the computers and the food we scrounge. Every inspector with that evil smile. Everybody's got flight service on speed dial. Hey, we on a flight chopper. Hey, hey, on a flight chopper.
Don't we all? Good morning. I'm Carl Cotton. I am the Chief Flight Instructor with Leading Edge Aviation in Bend, Oregon. One thing on here is a little premature. I just got an email today. I'm not quite yet an NVG examiner. I found out I'm a victim of sequestration. We were going to get around to it this week, and it's been delayed because of sequestration. I'm soon to be an NVG examiner as well. I've been teaching flying in one form or another for almost 33 years, ranging from R-22s all the way up to Blackhawks with the County of Los Angeles Fire Department, everything in between. I've been a check airman for a number of different companies. I'm currently a check airman in the Llama, and about to be in the Bell 206 again. So I'm continuously instructed regardless of the type of flying I've done. I've done a wide range. I've been a short haul rescue pilot in 3 different national parks, with the County of Los Angeles Fire Department, Bell 412, Blackhawks, Bell 205s, wide range of utility work. I've always stayed in the teaching end. I've always been an instructor pilot or check airman or beyond an examiner. I like teaching, and I really like teaching the next generation of instructors. I take great pleasure in mentoring pilots. So, with that, let's get started. How many flight instructors in here? Current flight instructors? How many are currently teaching? Making a living of this? Okay, good. And how many are close to being instructors? All right. How many Robinson instructors? Mostly Robinson? What else? Anybody in Bell 206? Okay. Anything bigger? Nope. Okay. This course is designed primarily for the Robinson, but there's a lot of stuff here that applies to any type of helicopter. Like I said, I've instructed all the way up into Blackhawks. And really, the techniques don't change all that much from aircraft to aircraft. The systems change a little bit, but technique-wise, pretty much the same. Okay, teaching flight maneuvers. So I'm not a big fan of the students are out to kill you mindset. Students are there to learn. And it's your job to keep them from getting killed. Our two primary responsibilities with flight instructors are, don't hurt anybody, don't break anything. If you go out for a training period and you come back and you haven't hurt anybody, you haven't broken anything, you're having a pretty good day. You go out and you haven't hurt anybody, you haven't broken anything, and there's some learning that took place, well, now you're having a great day. Those are your responsibilities. When I say expect the unexpected, I know that's cliche, but it couldn't be more true. In fact, I just got a recent reminder of that. I've been doing MBG training with two of my instructors. Very experienced guys, very confident pilots. Both of them on off airports on goggles got me in a low RPM with an R44 because they were so nervous flying goggles, they were over gripping the throttle. No criticism of them whatsoever. But here we are doing something where I never expected to get into a low RPM situation doing MBG training. And there I was with both of them. So note to self, we're making call outs now on RPM on goggles. Okay, so be prepared at all times for anything to happen. There's really never a time as a flight instructor that you can truly, completely relax. You must be on your game at all times. When you ask a student to do something, be prepared for them to do the opposite, too much or too little of what you ask them to do. And they'll usually get it. Okay? Be certain the student understands the element of maneuver. This is a great opportunity where student tells, instructor does. By doing this, you may find out that the student doesn't understand the maneuver. If you ask the student to talk you through a hovering on rotation, and he tells you, okay, looking outside, you position your left hand, roll the throttle up, and have full left pedal, you might want to stop for just a moment before you actually do that maneuver and talk it over. I do this a lot when I fly with people that I've never flown with before. I'll ask them how they're going to do certain things, low RPM recognition and recovery, auto rotations, and there's a number of times when I say, well, let's stop and talk about this for just a moment before we actually do that thing you're talking about. Okay, maintain your proficiency. There's nothing wrong with you doing a little flying on every one of your flight periods. Nothing wrong at all. Again, this is a great opportunity for student tells, instructor does. So it's a win-win. Student gets to take his hands off the controls for a moment. He gets to analyze the maneuver while talking you through it. All the while, you maintain your proficiency. Remember, if you go out and demonstrate a maneuver like a hovering auto rotation, and you're heading off 30 degrees, you made an impression upon that student. It's going to be very hard to shake. Okay, so maintain your proficiency. You're not cheating the student by you doing some flying every flight period. Okay, pointing out relations of perceptions as they occur. Anybody here remember what perceptions are? FOIs? Anybody? Not mine. Come on, somebody give me the definition of a perception. Really? Okay, FOIs are important. FOIs, they're not just a bunch of cycle valves. There's some really great stuff in the aviation instructor's handbook. And I find that when my instructors come to me with a problem dealing with a student, the first thing I tell them is, did you try to find the answer in the aviation instructor's handbook? Because it's probably there. Written by some pretty smart people that look at human behavior and the way human beings learn. They do this for a living. So some good stuff in there. Nobody in here can give me the definition of perception. Say that again. No. Perception is when you give meaning to a sensation. We do that all the time as instructors, don't we? Students are going to be going through a lot of sensations they've never experienced before. Auto rotation, hovering, you name it, they're all brand new. You've probably never seen an aircraft with some of the attitudes and positions they're going to see in flight training. Okay? Control isolation. What I mean by that is to isolate out of control if a student is having difficulty with it, or if you're introducing a new maneuver. So for example, on hovering, we won't want to give the student the cyclic, the collective, and the pedals all at once. We want to isolate each one of those controls so that student understands what each one does until he gives meaning to the sensations that each one of those controls has, and then we put it all together, okay? If you have problems with a student on entries to auto rotation, obviously he needs some work with attitude control. That's cycling. So there's a lot of opportunities to use control isolation, and it really enhances learning. Ergonomics. There's a lot of things that can really affect you as a helicopter pilot. And some of those are related to simply your body position in the aircraft. So make sure that the seat position, pedal position, cycling position, all of that is normal. Did you know, by the way, as flight instructors, that you can write federal aviation regulations? Is anybody aware of that? When you put a limitation on a solo endorsement, you have just written an FAR, and it's enforceable. If you say that students got to fly in cowboy boots, then they got to fly in cowboy boots. If you say that they need a 2-inch cushion behind their back, they have to have that. That is a federal aviation regulation. So if that's what's necessary to get somebody in a proper flying position, do it. One of the downsides to the Robinson T-bar cycling system, there's some upsides we'll talk about in a minute. One of the downsides is that you can find somebody in a very unnatural flying position. I have seen people, excuse me, I put my foot up here. I've seen people with their hands over here. Well, there's no cyclic in the world that can go through your leg. I've seen them with the hands up here, or over here. So make sure that the student's hand, sorry about that, is properly supported by the leg, and all the movements are coming from the wrist forward, not from the arm. Pretty hard to be smooth with your hand up in the air. I've flown a couple of Sikorsky products where the cyclic is just simply built that way and you have no choice. But in most training helicopters, you can get in a normal flying position. Students' eyes, this is a biggie. It's a biggie in night vision goggle training. It's a biggie in everything that we do. You'll find quite frequently that if a student is struggling with something, they're looking in the wrong place. So cross-check where they're looking. Watch their eyes. For example, hovering. If somebody's over-controlling and hovering, I can almost guarantee that they're looking in too close. And they're seeing all those little movements that a helicopter naturally makes, and they're trying to overcompensate for it. In my night vision goggle training, I'm constantly looking at where they're looking, because it makes a big, big difference. So watch their eyes. Okay. Repetitions. This is quite true. There are actually studies that show that after 4 or 5 of the same thing, the level of learning declines sharply, and when it comes to auto rotations, the accident rate goes up sharply. So I'm really pretty much a zealot when it comes to that. The guys who have flown with me, we really do count them off. And at 5, we stop. That's 5 total. So if I do 2, and the student does 3, that's 5. That doesn't mean you can't do more later on in that flight period. It means go do something else and then come back to it. The accident rate goes up big time after the 5th one. Okay, red zone. The red zone is something that you probably have heard described when it comes to playing football, for example. I'll use the analogy where a wide receiver goes out to catch a pass. As the ball snaps, he's in the green zone. As he heads down the field, he starts to enter a yellow zone. As the ball is released, he's really deeply in that yellow zone, and as the ball starts coming into his hands, he's in the red zone. He's totally focused on catching that football, knowing that he's probably about to get nailed by some defenseman. He doesn't care. Totally focused. That's where you need to be on a lot of maneuvers, especially auto rotations and slopes, the high accident rate maneuvers. I actually do, if you fly with me, you'll notice me do a little state change that involves me just sitting up a little bit straighter in my seat. And I'll do this before auto rotations and slopes. I literally do a little state change where I'm totally focused on this maneuver, okay? Learning games, tail rotor spotting, E-tail prediction, main rotor sizing. These are great games that you can start right off the bat with primary students. And these will have great benefits later on in their career as well as yours. I can't tell you, as a mountain pilot, how much I use ETL prediction. Now, I've worked at 18,500 feet, so I've definitely had some mountain time. The ability to predict when the aircraft is going to get ETL and when it's going to lose ETL are great tools. You can teach that to a primary student. On every takeoff, you have the opportunity to simply ask him, based on the ambient conditions, where do you think we're going to get ETL? And you can get really, really good at this. And it's great because every takeoff you have the opportunity to practice this. And it's got me out of some really tight spots knowing that, okay, by the time I get to that rock outcropping, I'm going to have ETL. Remember, at ETL, you go from having an old, heavy, poor performing helicopter to a pretty good helicopter, just like that. You can take a machine that can barely hover, go through ETL, and then you get all kinds of performance. So knowing where you're going to get it, and conversely, on approach to where you're going to lose it, those are pretty good tools. Tower spotting, that is simply finding a place on the ramp or out in the field and ask the student to place the tail rotor over that spot and see how close he gets to it. You want to get good at this, especially before off airports. Pretty important. Same with main rotor, to do the same thing. And with main rotor, I'll even have the student get out and go look and see how close he got. These are all things that can benefit you throughout your career. Okay, instructor intervention is something that's near and dear to me. You'll read a lot of NTSB reports of instructional accidents, and time again, you read that the instructor failed to intervene. Failed to intervene. And really, that's one of the primary reasons you're in there. That's why you're there, is to intervene. So, when you intervene, you've reached a personal limit. And we'll talk about setting those limits here in a minute. You've reached your personal limit. You probably are well beyond the student's personal limit. And now you're into your limitations. These are getting pretty serious. When you take control of the aircraft, you can leave no doubt as to who's flying the aircraft. How many people in here have actually gone out with their chief instructors and practiced doing intervention techniques? Okay? It's good. A lot of people don't get it. They don't get this training. I'm on the flight training committee. One of the things we're pushing for is to have control intervention be part of the CFI training and to be included in the PTS. You know the FAA, by the time this happens, you'll all be flying Skytrains. This is a long way down the road, but we'll get it eventually. But it really needs to be taught at the CFI level. Because intervening, usually there's not much time to get control of the aircraft and get yourself out of a bad situation. I take out all of my new instructors, and pretty much everybody I fly with, we practice this. I'll play the student, I'll have them intervene. And to this day, I have never met a person yet that does it assertively enough the first time. It's amazing. I get people that are real type A, powerful personalities, but when it comes to intervening on the controls, too passive. So I'm not telling you to yell at the student every time you have to take controls, but you have to make it very clear that you have the aircraft. I will, when I play the part of the student, I will actually freeze up on the controls. Anybody have that? Pretty exciting, huh? It'll happen. Yeah, pretty scary. You're right. So I actually go out and I do that. I'll freeze up the controls and make them have to hit me and take the controls away from me. But if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. One of the good things about the Robinson T-bar cyclic system is that you can literally take the cyclic out of the student's hands. And there are times when that's a really good thing. Okay? So that's one of the upsides to it. Okay? But if you have to, in plain language, tell them what you want. Let go, get off. Okay? I've had to do that many times. Keep this in mind. In auto rotation, at 1,500 feet per minute, you're approaching the ground at 25 feet per second. So, if you find yourself at 40 feet at the flare point with Robinson, and it's time to take control of that aircraft, how much time do you have to get control of that aircraft before you hit the ground? Not much. Not much. Okay? So, if you haven't practice this with your chief instructor, I encourage you to ask him for the training. Go out and do it. Not sure how to launch this, but this remote, so I'll do it manually. Okay, where do you think the intervention should have taken place on this maneuver? On the entry? 200 feet? Okay. Okay. Anybody else? How about on the ground before the flight? How about setting out exactly how you're going to do this maneuver? Putting limits on the maneuver, like the 200-foot call out? I agree with you on that completely. If they had the 200-foot floor built into that maneuver, that would have been a go-around. And guess what? A minute later, we would have been in position to do it all over again, instead of that. It doesn't take very long to recover the aircraft, go back around and do another one. There's no point in taking a maneuver to the ground like that. Intervention starts in the ground. For example, there was a flight school a couple of years ago that had an accident where the student pulled the mixture control instead of the carburetor heat, and they had an accident. And again, I would argue that the intervention for that should have started on the ground, where you have a very clear policy with your student that anytime you're going to reach down in this very important area, that we're going to identify what we're touching and we're going to verbalize it. I'm identifying the carburetor heat, I'm applying carburetor heat. That accident never happens. On this, if there's a clear understanding as to how they're going to do this maneuver and where the go-around point was going to be. If we're at this point and the airspeed and RPM aren't within this range, we're going around, this would never happen. Okay, so intervention starts in the ground. Being very clear with your students how you're going to do the maneuvers and what the safety parameters are. I'm a big believer, as you mentioned, I'm a big believer in the Robinson 200-foot ceiling on the 180 auto, being completely out of the turn, aligned with the landing, RPM, airspeed under control at 200 feet, and then also at 100 feet. We do, because, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we talk about auto rotations. If there's something wrong about auto rotation, you want to go back and fix what got wrong. In other words, if the airspeed's off, let's go back and work on airspeed. If the entry was flawed, let's go back and work on entry. There's no point in continuing with the glide down to the flare and then possibly have this type of outcome. Okay, not quite as exciting, but one thing I've run into over the years is simply teaching turns. If you have a continuous horizon to use that rather than looking at the mountains. Much easier for a student to have a horizon to deal with than looking out at a mountain background. You can actually use the tip path plane like a protractor. You can tilt that tip path plane to any degree of bank that you want and hold it all the way to the turn quite easily. Have the student watch for pitched excursions during the turn. It's pretty common to have pitched excursions. Okay. Vertical takeoff to a hover. When you can, use a vertical reference. And I don't mean vertical reference in the sense of long line. I mean something that sticks up vertically from the ground that they can look at. It makes this maneuver much, much easier. So if there's signs or trees or something they can look at right out in front, it sticks up vertically, that helps a bunch. You want the student to look for the earliest sign of light on skids. As soon as they detect light on skids, stop all movement, and then a slow, steady ascent to 5 feet. You'll find a big tendency for students to want to rush this maneuver. As soon as the aircraft breaks ground, a lot of collective. And in my world, there's no excuse for dynamic rollover. Dynamic rollover is always some sort of inappropriate application of the collective. almost can't get there. There's a few other ways you can get into dynamic rollover, but the training environment is mostly because of an inappropriate application of collective. So watch for that on vertical takeoffs. That's a real common trait among all students. Vertical landing. Want to keep the helicopter moving down constantly. As you get closer to the ground, you'll find that ground effect will slow down the rate of descent. You may have to put a little bit more reduction of collective in there. That's pretty common. If you can get your student to keep from anticipating ground contact, they'll have a great vertical landing. It's the anticipation of ground contact that gets people looking for the ground, stabbing at the ground, and causing this maneuver to go south. Okay. Really, if you do it right, ground contact should be a surprise. It's important, though, once you do make that ground contact, to transfer the weight from the rotor system onto the skids. You don't want to be caught in an area where you're light on the skids and motor in there. That's an area where you can start to drift around, catch a skid, and over you go. Okay. In primary training, when I say primary, I even include commercial training, but in primary training, being smooth on landings is not nearly as critical as this. Just getting on the ground and transferring weight down. Smooth will come later. It will come with time. A nice firm landing is A-okay with me. I'm fine with that. Hovering flight. When I say demonstrate ability to recover, I'm talking about demonstrating to the student your ability as a CFI to recover the aircraft when it starts drifting left and right, going backwards, and doing all the crazy stuff that happens with a student learning to hover. Remember, the student probably has never been in an aircraft that's going to go through the oscillations that are going to take place during this hover training. It's going to be something quite new to them and pretty uncomfortable. So it's good to go out and show them what you can do in terms of recovering the aircraft so they know that their margins are way out here and not right here. So they can move around quite a bit and they're perfectly safe because you have the ability to take control of the aircraft and recover it for them. Okay? That they're safe. Remember, if they're apprehensive, learning stops. They go right into tunnel vision and all outside input ceases to come in. So by making them comfortable with it, you can do to get the aircraft recovered goes a long way to enhancing their learning. Again, a vertical reference really, really helps on this. Something for them to look out at 75 feet, 100 feet in front of them that sticks out really helps a lot. Hovering, like a lot of things that we do, pretty much everything we do in flying helicopters is all about attitude flying. So there is a hover attitude for the ambient conditions that sustains the hover. Get the student to look for any change from that hover attitude, knowing that if there's a change in the hovering attitude, you're no longer going to be hovering. You're going to be moving in one direction or another. So have them really watch for that change. If they detect the change, simply put the aircraft back into that hovering attitude. Be patient. It may take a moment or two. The aircraft will stabilize, and you're back in the hovering. It may not be where you started, and that's okay. You can move around a little bit initially. Okay? As brand new instructors, you're going to have a tendency to want to get on the controls way too much. Okay? You guys find that, guys, you're all instructors now, you find that with time you're on the controls less and less? Yeah. I hope so. Normally, and it's okay, you're going to do it, you're going to be on the controls too much. It's just one of those things, with time, you'll realize where your limitations are, and you'll be on the controls a little less. When it comes to stopping oscillations, what I'm talking about here is that if the oscillations got to the point where students no longer learning, get on the controls with them, get the aircraft back into a hovering attitude, and then turn the aircraft back over to the student. Be very, very clear with students what it means when you're going to be on the controls of them. What that means is they're still flying. I say this to people all the time. Okay, I'm going to be on the controls with you, but you're still flying. Don't let go. Anybody had a student let go of the controls? Hovering? Hovering is a real common place where we'll let go of the controls. Okay. So get really clear with your students. Don't let go until I say, I've got it. If I tell you that I'm on there with you, I'm just helping you get it stabilized back up so you can take over and start up again. We're to the point now we're not really learning, we're drifting all over. The one exception here is if you get into a dangerous attitude, or if we have a big rearward drift build up, you want to get on controls and stop that right now. Okay? But the normal moving around that people do to hover, you don't have to be yanking the controls out of their hands every time. Simply get on there, help them stabilize, but make sure they understand what that means. Again, here's a ground intervention, right? We're going to talk about, before we ever do this maneuver, what it means when I say, I've got it, you've got it, I'm on the controls with you. It's important. Okay? Really important on hovering, if you're doing control isolation, it's critical that you let them know which controls you have and what they do. You say, okay, tell you what, you've got the cyclic, you have control of the attitude. I'm going to handle the collective with pedals. So I've got altitude and heading control. You've got attitude control. Here we go. Okay. So to set it like that, 20 or 30 seconds worth of conversation can stop a whole lot of grief. Make sure they're clear on what they're doing and what you're doing. Okay. Talk about limiting rearward drift, that's a big one. Frequent breaks on hovering, absolutely. Do not take some poor student out there and spend an hour hovering right off the bat. They'll be done in the first 15 minutes. Okay, if they're really struggling with hovering, just move on to approaches. And without saying a word about hovering, don't say the hover word, at the end of the approach, guess what we'll probably be doing? You know, it's amazing. You say the hover word, or, for example, you take somebody who can hover just great, and you go to do slopes. What happens to their hovering? Okay, they're hovering great. All right, great, let's go do slopes all over the place. Same thing in long line. I do a lot of long line training. Somebody can hover like a champ, but the minute you put the long line on, there goes the hover. You know they know how to hover. So, if they're having trouble hovering, move on to approaches. At the end of the approach, the aircraft's sitting there stable. You know, guess what? You're hovering. There it goes. Resignation is a big deal. Most of us, I'll ask for a show of hands, how many people here ever hovered on their first attempt? Sure. I'll say it happens. A lot of times it's pure luck. It's pretty rare. How many people here thought that you could never learn how to hover after the first attempt? Yeah. So what do you think your students are going through? That same type of feeling defeated, resignation. So a great place to show them that what they're doing out there, when they're all over the place like they normally are, you take them back in and show them the syllabus, you just have a normal day today. That's a normal first time hovering or second time. You're right on course. This is what is to be expected. It's a great opportunity for you to tell them about how hard it was for you to learn to hover, or whatever maneuver we're talking about. You know, let them know that, yeah, I had trouble with auto rotations on entry. I had trouble with this. Let them know that's normal. And that's why we have a syllabus, because we're not going to lie about the grade when we come in and give them whatever grade they earn. But for hovering, they're going to be all over the place initially. Okay, so watch for resignation. People will get really defeated by this. It's one of those you feel like, there's no way, I can never do this. Normal takeoff from hover. Again, there's a ground component of this that will make this maneuver, like every maneuver, go so much better. If the student understands all of the aerodynamics involved in the normal takeoff, it's not going to be a surprise to them when they go out, the nose pitches up, the aircraft yaws left, and roll right, and does all this, and it shudders. They're going to know the aerodynamics behind that. It's not to say they're not going to struggle with it, but at least they won't be wondering, why is the aircraft doing all these weird things? They're going to know. They'll know the aerodynamics behind it. Now it's just a matter of going out and actually doing the maneuver. If you have the availability of taxiway stripes or runway stripes, that really helps for them to fly a nice straight line initially. Otherwise, they're going to be wandering all over the place. Anything you can find to make it easier on the student. For example, the night vision goggle training we're doing, we find places that The guy in the left seat, the instructor, has a great ground references. Well, the guy on the right seat's doing vertical takeoffs and landings to make sure that we give ourselves every advantage. Same thing here. Give them an advantage. You know, after a while, they'll be able to do this maneuver off the airport, anywhere they go. But initially, give them something to line up right. Power management, I'm sure you've all seen this, where you're at hover power, you go through ETL, and now the power drops down a couple of inches of manifold pressure, a couple of % torque on the turbine, and it stays there. And now you have this anemic rate of climb coming out. It's okay to keep hover power in there until we're at 60 knots, 300 feet. That's a 5-minute limit. It's a long time. It's not going to take you 5 minutes to get to 60 knots to 300 feet. So pretty common to see the power drop way down right after going through ETL. And again, back to the ETL game, I can't emphasize enough how important this skill is, to be able to predict ETL. Everybody understand what I'm talking about there? Be able to look at the conditions. Okay, I've got 5 knots worth of wind today. So I think right there by that line on the runway, I'll have ETL. Same thing on the approach. I think right about here, I'm going to lose ETL. Pretty important knowing when you're going to lose ETL when it comes to a lot of things, like running landings, hydraulics off, being in the mountains where you want to get into ground effect. You don't want to lose ETL and still be out of ground effect. So there's a lot of places where this skill is going to benefit you and your student. Something I find a lot on approaches with students, they rush themselves and make the patterns too small. And now they're turning final, and a lot of stuff is happening really quick. It's okay on initial training to make B-52 patterns. It's okay. You want every approach, doesn't matter if it's normal, shallow, steep, to begin at a baseline of 300 feet and 60 knots. So everyone starts in the same place, and then we go from there. So the turn final, 300 feet and 60 knots every time. This next one is one that I find that people just don't understand. And it's very common to find approaches way too fast. Something I look at a lot is a DPD. In the helicopter flying handbook, if you look at what the guidance is in there for approaches, you talk about a brisk walk. You know how slow that is? We're not even running. It's still a walk. Brisk walk. It's very, very slow. And for a good reason. It gives the student a lot of opportunity to correct. You know, as they get more proficient and on in their careers, get a little faster. But I'll tell you what, I've been flying for a long time. And you don't see me come zipping in. I still don't. I still slow it up, get everything powered up. And I'm not much above a brisk walk. Even, I don't care if I'm flying a Black Hawk. You know, you don't save much time by coming and whipping in. And lots of bad things can happen at the bottom. Very, very rare for a helicopter to get in trouble by going too slow. Very rare. Very few accident reports out there where you read them. You got too slow on final. No. You know, the only exception to that is if you don't have OGE performance. But other than that, you just can't go wrong going slow on a helicopter. We'll make up for it in the air. On approach, nice and slow, powered up. And again, a lot of these things we're doing in initial training will benefit you later in your career when you're landing at 18,000 feet from the top of Denali. Guess what? That powered up, slow approach is the way to do it. Right? Normal approach to a hover. Collective controls the angle, cycle controls the rate of closure. Another great maneuver to do the control isolation we talked about earlier. Great place to do it. If the student's having trouble with rate of closure, what do we give them? Give them a cycler. You'll take the collective, you take the pedals, and again, you're going to let them know what you're doing. I got the collective, I got the pedals, here's what I'm doing. You've got the cyclic, here's what you're doing. Great place to isolate. Quite simply, on an approach, it doesn't matter if it's normal, steep, or shallow. The target should simply just grow larger, 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 while remaining in one place in the windscreen. If the target moves up, collective moves up. Target moves down, collective moves down. Just that simple. All throughout the approach, you want the student to ask himself, am I high or low, fast or slow? It's just that simple. High or low, fast or slow, and adjust accordingly. Okay? Here's something, this last point, something that's required to be taught before solo. How many people here are making sure that they're doing crosswind takeoffs and approaches prior to solo? Required. Imagine the spot you'll be in if you have a solo student out there has an accident that involved crosswind, and they find out you never even did crosswind training prior to solo. Okay, it's required. So take the opportunity on a day when the winds are light, but strong enough that they can feel it. It's still well within the capability of the helicopter, and make crosswind approaches, make downwind approaches. And here again is another mountain flying technique. I base everything I do in the mountains pretty much off of the aircraft's behavior. Yeah, I'll look at wind patterns on water and things of that nature, but ultimately, I look at how the helicopter is performing and what it's telling me. Helicopter has very distinct characteristics with the left crosswind, right crosswind, tailwind, and end of wind. And those are the things I look at when I make approaches in the mountains. I can say right now if I'm in the wind or not, which is very, very critical. So it's a great skill to develop right in primary training. So now we'll do some downwind approaches. We have a performance. You're not going to get yourself in trouble. Do a downwind approach and show them the characteristics of a downwind approach. Do a right crosswind, do a left crosswind, and compare all of those. So wherever you go, that student can identify immediately if he's got a left crosswind or a tailwind or a right crosswind. I can pick up an aircraft without knowing anything about the surface wind and immediately tell you where the wind is. And it's not that hard to do, not to be that much of a sleuth to figure it out. It's pretty obvious. So develop these skills. Any questions so far? Y'all still with me? All right. Auto rotation. Auto rotation is certainly a red zone maneuver. And we'll talk quite a bit here about auto rotations. We talked earlier about personal limits and about control intervention. Setting personal limits for auto rotation, any maneuver for that matter, is critical. And you should never, ever violate those personal limits. Not 1 knot, not 1% RPM. In other words, if your personal limit on going into the flare on auto rotation, for example, is 55 knots and an RPM no more than 102%, for example, don't ever accept 54 knots in 103. Because if you accept 54 knots today, tomorrow you go 53. Pretty soon, you're going to be outside of your personal limits and bad things are going to happen. So set those limits. Don't violate them. And as we talked about earlier, it's no big deal if you go around. I timed it. There's times I can be back around in this maneuver in a matter of a couple of minutes. That's just not, it's not worth taking an auto rotation or any maneuver that's not going right and continuing on with it. You can so quickly be back around, and while you're going around, you're talking about what happened and why we're working on it and what to work on, and go do it again. Go do it again. You got all day. You got tomorrow. You got the next day. You don't have to make this thing happen today. All right? Introducing auto rotations. Here again, we want to introduce these maneuvers in a way that minimizes anxiety. Talked about how anxiety will cause a person's situational awareness to scale down, to become tunnel vision. Once you're apprehensive and scared, the learning stops. So you take somebody out to do an auto rotation for the first time who's never done one before, and you introduce it at 500 feet, and here comes the ground, here comes the flare, and all these things are happening. They're going to be apprehensive right from the get-go. Take them out away from the airport environment. Go to 3,000 feet, enter auto rotation, and show them the relationships between airspeed, rotor RPM, rate of descent, and emphasize that, look, we have all the control in powered off flight that we have in powered flight, with one exception, and that's the ability to maintain altitude. Everything else is normal. The aircraft operates as normal. We have to give up altitude to drive the rotor. Other than that, it's the same helicopter you've been flying all along. It does all the same things without power that it does with power. It's not a big deal. It's actually pretty fun. Okay. Something I'm really a zealot about is prior to entering auto rotation, to announce exactly what type you're doing. There have been a number of auto rotation accidents where the two people in the aircraft were on different sheets of music. One guy thought they're doing a full touchdown, one thought they're doing a power recovery, one thought they're doing a 180, one thought they're doing a straight in. So when I say right before you're about to enter, I'm just announcing. This is going to be a straight in auto rotation, power recovery. This will be a 180 auto, full touchdown. And that way, you're both focused on the same thing. There's no confusion about what you're doing. Again, here we go, middle red zone. Like I say, for me, if you fly with me, you'll actually see me kind of sit up in my seat a little bit. That puts me into that middle red zone. I do a state change. Okay. Practice the way you're going to play. Anybody in here ever had a real engine failure? Nobody? I've had one for 13,000 hours. It wasn't mechanical. It was snow ingestion. And I had all the right stuff. I had a particle separator, snow deflectors, had it all. It's still flamed out of me. Yeah. 300 feet, 50 knots on takeoff. And I can tell you for a fact that I was on the ground and back. It was so fast, it was just astounding. And it was pure muscle memory that got me on the ground and didn't break the helicopter. It turned out pretty good. In training auto rotations, you want to train these auto rotations exactly the way you want to fly them if the engine quits. So for example, I've seen flight schools at the end of the flare go into a go-around. What do you think that's training that person to do? When that engine quits, and it's pure muscle memory, and you're going to be on the ground in seconds, and you train to do auto rotations down to a certain point and go around, what do you think is going to happen at the very end of that auto rotation? The nose is going to get dropped, and there you go. I'll tell you this, that we do most of our training auto rotation at airports with perfect surfaces for touchdown. You can touch down and have a long ground run, which we do a lot of times in the R-22. Anybody here train at altitude above 4,000 feet? Yeah, I mean, some of the ground runs are inevitable. It's just one of those things. What do you think that's going to do if you're out at the airport? If you touch down with any forward speed at all, what do you think is going to happen with that aircraft? It's going to roll up. It absolutely is. More than likely going to dig the toes in, and over you go. And now, the transmission, rotor blades, fuel, where it goes is pure luck. If it goes away from you, you're having a great day. So to the extent possible, and it is quite possible, even with an R-22 at altitude, with the exception of doing full touchdowns, it's possible to get that aircraft pretty much zeroed out on every single auto rotation. When I say with the exception of the full touchdowns, I can get on full touchdowns too, but it takes a heck of a hard kick. It's hard on the aircraft. So I'll allow a little bit more of a run on a full touchdown, but I figure we do so few of those compared to power recoveries in the pistons. That power recovery is pretty close to the real thing. You get it all the way down to the flare and level before the power really comes in. That's pretty good training. That's the way you're going to fly it if it really does quit on you. In turbines, it's just the opposite. Turbines, it's actually much easier to do a full touchdown. But keep in mind this thing about auto rotation, that in the real auto rotation, the engine really does quit. All of your protection is built in underneath you. There's nothing in front of you that's affording you any protection at all. I've flown one helicopter that has that, and that's the Black Hawk. It actually has some stuff built in to hit the ground going forward. Nothing else does. So, if you have to accept flaring a little bit harder and getting it stopped and taking a little bit of a vertical impact in a real auto rotation, take it. Because that's when all of that protection starts working for you. It starts with the skids yielding, to the seats collapsing. Some helicopters have high G seats like the 412, the Black Hawk. It's all underneath you. Nothing in front of you. Once the aircraft rolls up, all that protection is gone. Okay? So we want to practice the way we're going to play as much as possible. Okay? Anybody here had the throttle come back in on a full touchdown?
Question
Yeah.
on that. Just the question on, that I've discussed with many other instructors in schools and whatnot, as far as HELI-22, keeping the RPMs where in our, in the glide, and, you know, because well, some people are like, well, in a real deal, I'm gonna let those RPMs
Okay.
build up, or,
Yeah.
but then our schools are telling us, well, we should keep them right in the green arc, you know, or practice on our rotations. So
Right.
practicing the way we're gonna play.
I'm glad you brought that up. I hear this all the time. The question was, is it better, you know, in the real auto rotation, let the RPM go through the roof during the flare? Along with high RPM comes high what? Anybody know? High what else? Huh? Sink rate, that's right. So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if you allow the RPM to climb really high, guess what's happening to your sink rate? So yes, you have more RPM, but you need it because now you got this big sink rate. You're much better off to do a real auto rotation exactly like you do practice ones. Absolutely. Just in that green range, you're fine. Think about this. In the R22, for example, and I can talk about any helicopter, I'll just use the R22. Where do you do hovering autos from? What RPM do you do a hovering auto from? Where do you start? 104. How's it turn out? Pretty good. Pretty good, right? So there you go. Do you need 108? Do you need 110? Where you start the hovering auto is a little bit lower than where you're going to wind up at the termination of a flare or level. Not much, a little bit. How much more do you need? Keep in mind that all helicopters go through a drop test for part of the certification. Max burst weight, 5 feet, you let go of it, it hits the ground. And the skids yield, and that's part of the test. All right, so if you ever go auto rotation and you yield the skids, good on you. You know, as soon as that engine quits, you own that airframe. It's yours to do with as you please. Yeah. Even there, it doesn't matter if it's flare or not. It's still builds sink rate. Think about it. If you have more pitch in the blades, the RPM is coming down lower. If you have more pitch, you have more lift. So keep in mind the manufacturers of these helicopters go through a lot of flight testing, a lot of flight testing to figure out what works best for that make and model. And they're usually right. We put a lot of time into this stuff. We usually have broken a couple of helicopters along the way. They're usually right. So if they tell you to have the RPM within this range during auto rotation, the airspeed within this range, usually it's pretty right. I was fortunate enough, I flew the very first R22 ever built. And my instructors were Tim Tucker and a guy named Steve Hager, and they were the certification test pilots for Robinson. And we had the very first one. I went to work for Tim Tucker at Pacific Wing and Rotor. So I really got a good education on what goes on in certification training, or testing, I'm sorry, certification testing. And I came away from it realizing that these manufacturers, they know what they're talking about. You know, they tell you how to do something in their helicopter. It's usually the best way to do it. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Just don't forget that along with higher RPM comes higher sink rate. There's such a thing as too much of a good thing. And it's that way with RPM. I take my instructors out and we do really low speed auto rotations. I'll get them in a low RPM. We do all kinds of things, and it's amazing the energy that's still available. Quite a bit. We'll do them at 40, 45 knots. Just to demonstrate, this is not, I do things with my instructors that aren't necessarily for students' consumption, but it makes my instructors more confident. It widens their margins. So I'll take them out and do things. I'll do an auto rotation at 45 knots just to show them how much energy is really available. It's quite impressive, quite good. So I went to a flight school once that operated at high density altitudes, and they were carrying 70 knots of airspeed into their flares, and generally in the high green on the RPM. And they're having this horrendous ground runs because they're too fast and the RPM was too high. I remember the RPM was so high they couldn't completely flare because it's overspeed the rotor. So the first thing I did is I slowed them down and I brought the rotor RPM down, And next thing you know, we're getting zeroed out auto rotations at 6,000 foot DA, getting them completely stopped, which you can absolutely do. So we'll talk about that here in a second. In fact, it's right here. DA. So we have quite a few people that are at high altitude. Where are you at, Prescott? Yeah, it's high DA for sure. We're at 3,600 feet, so we're not quite where you're at, but we're high enough that in the summertime it matters. One of the things that gets overlooked a lot during high density altitude is the effect of the DA on true airspeed. As a general rule of thumb, true airspeed increases about 2% per 1,000 feet of DA. So you start pushing 6,000, 7,000 foot DAs, you're going a lot faster than indicated. So at my flight school, once we start getting in the summer and it gets warm, I'll bring the auto rotation airspeed back to 60. And it works out great because you're really a lot faster, sometimes 12, 14% faster than indicated. So make sure that you consider that. Here's another important point. Auto rotation RPM, I don't know why, but this is quite true. It just changes. It changes over time. And I strongly recommend that twice a year, usually once going into summer, once going into winter, you do auto rotation NR checks. There are procedures for every make and model of helicopter out there. Go out and you do auto rotation RPM checks. And you come back in and you plot all the numbers, and if it tells you that, given the conditions you did this test at, your RPM should have been 102, instead it was at 105, well, you're going to want some maintenance people to bring that down. Because here you are, 3% closer to an overhaul limit, to a real scary limit, where something might have been 108, it's really 111. It should have been 108. So make sure that you check and give your maintenance people on this, but you should check it twice a year. Okay, overspeed prevention. I'm not going to give you hard, fast numbers from where you're working, but the Robinson, especially the R22, is very prone to overspeeds. It's a very lightweight, low inertia rotor. And guess what? This is not just a Robinson thing. I've got a lot of time flying Blackhawks for LA County Fire. Big old Blackhawk is a low inertia rotor. So it's not just the R22 that has low inertia rotors. Blackhawk's got a low inertia rotor. It's no R22, yet it is a low inertia rotor. It's just something that is, it's something that's there, it's something that to deal with. There are ways to really minimize your chances of overspeed in the R22. I find that most overspeeds happen during the flare. Anybody disagree with that? I've seen them in other places, but generally the flare. Anybody else? Okay. I'll give you our numbers, and that doesn't need to be your numbers, but at our flight school, especially when we start getting into the higher DAs of summer, we go to the flare with the RPM between 98 and 101, and the airspeed between 60 and 65 in the summer. And if you are religious about those numbers, and if those numbers aren't there, it's a go-around moment. You'll do pretty good. It's pretty unlikely you'll have a rotor overspeed. Okay? And again, I'm not going to say this is going to work for you, but for us, 98 to 101, prior to the flare, airspeed 60 to 65. With the RPM down at the lower end of the range, we have a lower sink rate, and we can do a full effect flare. We can put as much flare as we want in there without worrying about overspeeding the rotor. And again, that's the goal, right? We want to decelerate this aircraft as much as we possibly can. If we can get it to 0, 0, that's the ideal. 0 forward, 0 vertical, that's what we're shooting for. If your RPM's too high and you're having to spill flare because you're going to overspeed the rotor, down the runway you go. Straight auto rotation, guard the pedals each and every time. Even if it's not a surprise forced landing, always slide your right foot up there and block the right pedal. There have been fatal accidents on auto rotations where a student got pulled up pedaling. Cluck it down, throttle close. Now, I know you're not supposed to chop the throttle in the Robinsons. I do it all the time. All the time. Because I came up from a group that we did it constantly. I still do it. And I'm pretty comfortable with it. But I have a few things going for me. I always make sure that I have a smooth, paved surface to go to. And I'll make this argument. You know, Robinson puts things in their flight manual too that are there to protect Robinson. All helicopter manufacturers do. Bell does it, Sikorsky, they all do it. I have no issues at all with closing the throttle. None. Think of how many hover mount rotations you do. You ever have one quit? That's a throttle chop, right? Throttle chop. Now, I'm not telling you to do something Robinson doesn't want you to do, but remember, their guidance is not in the limitations section. It's just guidance. I think there's a lot of merit to doing some sort of a closing of the throttle. It doesn't have to be right up to the stops. But I'll tell you what you don't want is to be in auto rotation and have the engine RPM in a place where the governor keeps trying to grab it. That is distracting as can be for a student. When that governor keeps trying to grab the engine and bring it up, you don't want to be there either. So somewhere between completely closed and the governor trying to get back in the game, pretty good place to be. Okay? Collect it down, throttle closed. With the Robinson, you know the RPM is going to build in the R22. So you can get ahead of that really easy by a little bit of up collecting and what I call trapping the RPM build. Just trap it before it comes up, and now you're behind it, and now you're doing this. It's up, you pull, it's down, you're doing one of these things. You're better off to get ahead of it. Okay? Talked about this before. Fix all the problems before continuing with the auto rotation. So if you have the students having trouble with entries, what's the point of going through the glide and going to the flare if their entries are flawed? I would argue there's no point, not at all. And here again, if they're having trouble with entries, get them out of the airport environment. Go out there to 3,000 or 4,000 feet and do a bunch of entries. I'll tell you this, if you can get your students to fly attitude on auto rotations, it's simple. There's nothing to do except wait for the flare to come. You can sit there bored. There we go, we're gliding. If you can get them to fly a consistent attitude on the straight in and 180, man, unless it's a really gusty day, you're going to have nothing to do while you're waiting for the flare. 100-foot check is absolutely critical. I really do believe in Robinson on this. Tim Tucker came up with these. We didn't do these back in the early days, and I'm a complete convert now. I really believe in them. If you're at 100 feet on a straight-in auto rotation, and the RPM and the airspeed aren't correct, go around. That's an I got it moment. I got it. Get the RPM down into the safe range, and as soon as that rotor RPM comes down into the green range, get the engine right back in the game. Get the engine, correlator, and governor working for you, because they'll do a whole bunch of work for you. Get them back in the game, get the needles married, and boy, you can pull the power right in and go around. And like I said before, going around and you're talking about what was flawed on the way, and we do another one. Good news, we get to do another one, right? Okay, 100-foot checks are absolutely critical. Okay. Flaring. Again, the manufacturer is probably right. They tell you to flare at 40 feet for the R22 or 60 feet for the Black Hawk, wherever it might be. That's probably where you need to do it. I have found that people have trouble visualizing where 40 feet is, so take them to 40 feet. If you've got the power to just take it off out of ground effect and hover up to 40 feet, hover up there and sit there for a minute and have a look around. This is 40 feet. This is what it looks like. You'll find there's a big difference between what you think is 40 feet and what I think is 40 feet. So 40 feet, start the flare. Again, the goal is to get as much deceleration as possible, right? That's the goal. So what I see frequently is people enter the flare and they just sit there and sit there and sit there about the first 2/3 of the auto rotation, and then at the last third on its tail. No. Try to get as much flare out of the aircraft as possible without delaying. So start the flare, see what kind of effect you're getting out of it. And here again, think about the ambient conditions. The first auto rotation you do of the day shouldn't be a wild ass guess. You should be a little bit of science behind it. If you've got 15 knots of wind, that's going to be a different looking flare than 0 wind. So you want to start thinking about this. What are the ambient conditions? What can I expect out of this flare? Pretty predictable, right? So you should get pretty close to your spot on the very first one. Remember, when I give your students a practical test, they got to hit it the first time. Okay? First one's not an experiment. You're going, I have no idea. let's see what happens. No, you should have an idea of what you're going to get out of this entire auto rotation. It's only conditions, all right? If the aircraft balloons don't level the aircraft, just quit flaring for just a millisecond, and then you'll re-intercept the glide slope. Okay? And just don't allow it to keep ballooning. Right? Here's a really common, well, just back up. I talked about joining the needles, and this applies to Robinsons or Bells or any other aircraft for that matter. Once the rotor RPM is within the allowable range for the engine, at the end of the flare, as you see the rotor RPM starting to decay, which means the airspeed energy is dissipated. You've used up all the energy by virtue of altitude, you've used up your airspeed energy, we're getting ready to use the kinetic energy of the rotor. When you see that RPM starting to fall down, start bringing the engine up, and ideally time it to where the engine joins the rotor at the top of the green. Anything less than that, you're already in the low RPM, right? For your Robinson guys, if you bring the RPM in, the engine in, and you join the needles at 101%, you're already in the low RPM. And now if you got two big heavy guys in there on a hot summer day, you may continue in the low RPM. And let's talk about that a little bit. If that happens to you, and by the way, I go out and do this with my instructors. If this happens to you, if you're in the low RPM during the power recovery, you want to make an attempt to recover the RPM. Do y'all know what milking the collective means? Anybody that doesn't know that? Okay, so you want to try that. So lower the collective and add a little bit of throttle, trying to regain the RPM. But if you haven't gotten the RPM back in the normal range by about 10 feet, and you're still in the low RPM, maybe it's still coming down, give up on recovering the RPM and get the aircraft ready to touch the ground. Where I see people get in trouble is they're so focused on trying to regain the RPM that now they hit the ground, out of trim, heels low, and over they go. If you've just gotten behind it, at 10 feet, if you haven't gotten the job done, now it's time to focus on something different, and that's putting the aircraft on the ground. And I can tell you this, that it doesn't matter if you're doing hydraulics off, auto rotation, whatever it might be. If you touch the ground level and straight in most helicopters, you can get away with a lot if you're level and straight. If you hit on the toes, hit on the heels, hit out of trim, you're going to have a bad day. So level and straight, and you can get away with a bunch. And remember, you're still going to have quite a bit of power applied. You have quite a bit of power applied, just not as much as you'd like, but plenty to do a running landing. Okay. So at that 10-foot point, focus completely on putting you on the ground correctly, because that's where you're going. If you haven't gotten it taken care of by 10 feet, you are going to the ground. So, all right? Here's the other thing I see all the time. At the very end of the auto rotation, the needles come back together, but we're still 12, 15 feet off the ground, and there goes the flare. No, just because the needles have come together does not mean that flare is over. Continue the flare right down to the manufacturer's recommended level altitude. Robinson's 8 feet, other aircraft is higher. And then assertively level your helicopter. Make sure you get it leveled up, get the tail away from the ground. But I see this all the time. Needles come together, auto rotation's over. No, the collective's still on the floor. You're still in auto rotation. You simply have the engine available now. It's in the game, it's ready, but you're still in auto rotation. Make sense? Okay. I see this a lot. And down the runway we go. And here's where tail strikes happen more often than anywhere else. What will happen is what I've just described. So the flare will be ended too early, the aircraft's level, and now you pick up a bunch of ground run. And when I say ground run, it can be in the air too. You pick up a lot of ground run. And now the student wants to bring the aircraft to a stop, which was the idea, right? Now they're loaded the ground, and oh, we're still moving forward. Dink, that's where you get the tail strike. You don't get that many tail strikes in a good, normal auto rotation. It's pretty rare, actually. It's when you have that ground run, it's like, oh, I'm still moving, I need to stop it. That's where you get the tail. Okay? Yes, sir?
So if you enter that flare pretty aggressively, and you see that build, what's the countermeasure?
You talk about the RPM build.
Yes.
Well, if you enter the flare at the range that I just talked about a minute ago, the build will happen, but it will never exceed 110. Never. And if it looks like it's going to, all you have to do is let up a little bit on the flare. Just don't put any more in. And I want to be clear what I'm saying, is when you start that flare, immediately assess how much you're getting out of it, and if conditions allow, keep putting more in. You want to put as much in as you can get away with, unless it balloons. And again, if it's a cold day, a lot of wind, you're not going to need much flare. It's a hot day, no wind, you get a lot more. But the idea is to start, make an instant assessment of what you're getting out of it. Now this isn't an exciting video because nobody hits the ground, but it's just a nice 180 auto. And when you do these things right, I assume you're shooting for the numbers. It was good auto rotation. We did this right, they're really no big deal at all. Remember, the 180 auto rotation is the number one cause, of training accidents. I knew somebody had an accident here just a while ago at another flight school, and I said right off the bat, I'll bet it was a 180. And guess what? It was. It's the number one cause of training accidents. But here again, if you put in your 200-foot call-outs, your 100-foot call-out, it should never happen to you. Okay? Control the RPM before starting the turn. And again, introduce these, just like we did in the straight-in autos, high and wide. And I always tell people that on the day of the check ride, there's nothing for me as an examiner that says how high and how wide the student can go. I tell students, sneak up as high and wide as you can get without the examiner seeing something. Make it a big arcing turn. The closer into the runway you are and the lower you are, the higher the rate, the higher the angle of the bank, and the higher the rotor arc is going to build. I'm not saying not to get to that point at some time. You do want to work your way down to where you're closer in and lower. But initially, introduce them really high and wide. Okay? Absolutely, positively control the RPM before you start the turn. So when I say control it, make sure that you've trapped the build and you can keep it controlled throughout the turn. Okay? Immediately start that first 90 degree. And here again, because back to those ambient conditions, assess what you have in ambient conditions. And that'll guide when you need to make that second 90 degrees. If it's a windy day, you'll need to make it sooner. If it's a calm day, then you can wait. Right? Cross-checking the spot throughout the maneuver is absolutely mandatory. That's what guides you on when to make the second 90 degrees, is by cross-checking the spot. 200-foot call-outs, that is, the aircraft should be aligned with the runway, out of the turn at 200 feet. And if it's not, it's a go-around moment. Okay? We saw what happens when you take these things to the ground when it's not right. Ah, I gave away the answer again. Darn it. Don't look at that. Nobody look. What's enhanced auto rotation? You can tell me without looking at the board. I clicked too fast. Who can tell me what enhanced auto rotation is? Robinson guys, you should be able to tell me. What is it? Zero airspeed? Okay, that's one. What does that mean? Rocking? Okay, yeah, you're all right. Max glide, minimum rate of descent, various entry points. Those are enhanced autos. How many of you are doing enhanced auto rotation training prior to solo? You better read the S-bar. Read the S-bar. You have to do it prior to solo. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be proficient at all kinds of auto rotation. But you had better have something documented prior to solo that they've at least seen some of these. Read the S-bar. You know, a lot of what I'm trying to teach you here is to keep you out of, not only having an accident, but out of liability. Right? You can do zero airspeed entries, max glide. Pick one. Just so you can look the FAA in the eye and the attorney in the eye and say, we did them. Okay? It's required. And there's plenty of time before solo. You got 20 hours, right? Minimum before solo with the S-bar. There's time, right? There's plenty of time. You can go to 1,000 feet or higher, enter an enhanced auto rotation, reconfigure it 500 feet to a normal auto rotation. You get 2 for the price of 1. You get 2 auto rotations in 1. Great. But make sure you reconfigure it to normal by 500 feet. So if you got your RPM down at 90%, the airspeed's back to 55, get everything back to normal by 500 feet. I'm not saying in the real world, if I had to stretch an auto rotation somewhere, let me back up on that too about stretching. One of the things in my previous slide I want to talk about, I'm a really, really big believer in it's better to do a good auto rotation to a bad area than a bad auto rotation to a good area. When you do a bad auto rotation to a good area, you simply make it easier for the paramedics and coroner to come get you. I've seen this. I've had friends killed doing a bad auto rotation to a good area. You're much better off doing a perfect auto rotation into the trees, into the sloping terrain, whatever it might be, perfect RPM, perfect acceleration. You have a fighting chance there. So I know a guy that did had an engine there doing seismic in Pennsylvania. And I don't know how he managed because there's no LZs there. He managed to clear the trees and get this Hughes 500 into an open area, and it killed him. But he made it. He made it. I'll give him that. He would have been so much better off just putting it in the trees. So we start talking about max velocity and minimum rate. Those are all great things, and there's applications for those in the real world, for sure. I have a friend of mine had an engine failure in a llama and stretched it for almost 2 miles. He was up, coming off of the mountain. A llama, and the llama comes down like a beveled brick. He stretched that thing for a long, long way. Bell Helicopter now is doing all of their auto rotations at minimum rate of descent. So there's a lot to be said for that. Right? Important to get into the configuration quickly, so don't waste hundreds of feet trying to get the rotor RPM, down to 90%, for example, and get the airspeed dialed in. Try to get there as quickly as you can. Get in that configuration. Fly the configuration at 500 feet, come out of it. Hover out rotation. Red zone, red zone, red zone. This is the one maneuver that there's no going around. Once you roll the throttle off, there's no going around. By the way, how many people in this room have ever experienced complete, full-blown blade stall? Nobody? One guy. That scary, scary thing that Robinson teaches us all about, the blade stall. Shows people dead in the helicopter, it scares the hell out of us. I bet every one of you has had a complete, full-blown blade stall in your career. Every time you do a hovering auto rotation, complete blade stall. We roll the throttle off, and then we pull the collective up. Yeah, the blade stall. You bet they do. And it takes quite a lot of effort to make them stall. A lot. So we'll talk about this in a second, about doing low RPM recognition recovery. Yeah, it's great to have respect for low RPM. It's another thing to be afraid of it. Right? We've all had blade stall. Lots of them. Okay? Reference is the key. So looking out in front of the helicopter, don't overthink this maneuver. Simply look outside, reposition the hand, when you roll the throttle off, do whatever it takes to maintain your reference. Maintain alignment with that reference. If it takes a lot of right pedal, okay. If it takes a lot of right cycle, that's fine. Whatever it takes to maintain the reference. Okay. Here again, we can introduce this maneuver slowly by just rolling the throttle nice and gentle until you get proficient at it. Right. Anybody do one of these and have the throttle come back in on the hovering auto? Fun, huh? Yeah. Make sure it's off. No aft drift. Now, here's another one. I've seen this a lot. I've seen people do this as a crutch, and I've seen it just in general, where people like to touch down with a little forward movement. Ideally, you want to touch down with no movement at all. If you do touch down on the toes, do not put aft cyclic in. You will yield the aft cross tube. The aircraft will really lever hard back on the sails. So you touch down going forward, maintain that forward cyclic, and slide on. Don't try to level. When I'm in the left seat, somebody's doing hovering auto rotations, my hand's there just to stop them from going back with the cyclic. Okay. You will bend the cross tube guaranteed. Forced landings. How many of you have gone out and practiced doing forced landings with your chief instructor? Okay, where he goes out and you do them for various levels. I'll go with my instructors to do forced landing training that's appropriate for a private pilot, commercial pilot, CFI, various levels. It's something you should practice, absolutely. It's kind of scary to think about. A lot of people get their CFI. The first forced landing that you've ever done is a real thing with the student. Never even practiced it. So, it's a red zone maneuver. Make sure that the student understands his role and your role. In other words, Bob, starting today, I'm going to start giving you forced landings. When I do, I'm going to say these words. And when I say these words, I'm going to do this thing. I want you to respond by doing X. Make sense? Forced landing. I'm going to crack the throttle a little bit, lower the collective. At this point, I want to see you take over, enter auto rotation, establish RPM, airspeed, and spot. All right? Always assume the engine will quit. Make sure that you have a paid level service available to you. Now, you'll find places in your training area you'll like. Sometimes there's communities that they started to build and never completed them. So there's cul-de-sacs and streets out there that don't have power lines along them. Some place where you know, absolutely, I can make it to this paid level service that I have here. Okay? All right? Block the right pedal. We talked about that earlier, about how if the student gets full left pedal on you, it's not good. All right? And we talked a lot about good auto rotation to a bad spot. It's much better than the other way around. Okay. Quick stops. I like to do these just like the auto rotating flare. It builds that sight picture for 40 feet. Per the helicopter flying handbook, you can be at 40 feet. It's 25 to 40. So you can be there. Take up to 40 feet and make it just like an auto rotating flare. Okay? So entry, auto rotating attitude. Toward the end of the flare, as the airspeed is dissipating, you look out towards the end of the runway or taxiway, you'll see it start to move up. That's your cue to level up, get the power in, and complete it. Another big red zone. This is another one where I've had people get into low RPM or high RPM with their R22 on check rides. Students get so nervous on check rides. We were sitting there one time, I watched RPM start creeping. I'm like, huh, governor there? And I realized this guy's gripping the collecting so hard, RPM started going. So there's a place where I would never have thought it should get into an RPM problem on a slope. But it can happen. Right? Collective. As an instructor, if there's one control that I'm guarding on slopes, it is the collective. It's the only one that can really get you in trouble. Cyclic, a little bit. Pedals, not at all. Collective is absolutely the key. Watch for over-controlling. I told you before, then you say slopes, here we go. Hovering goes to heck. So, how much cyclic into the slope? Just enough to keep pressure on it. That's it. And this is a test question I usually ask people in an American-made helicopter. Given the choice between putting left or right skid up slope, which one? And I hope you'd say the right skid. There's a whole litany of reasons why. Okay? But it is the right skid on American-made helicopters. Okay, low RPM recognition and recovery. Talking about before, that we kind of want to take people from the scared to death level to the respectful level, especially after they come back from the safety course. I'll guarantee you, they're scared of low RPM. So, what you want to do on low RPM recognition and recovery, and this is different than governor off. Even though you turn the governor off to do this, it's not governor off training. This is low RPM recognition and recovery. You want to engage their auditory and kinesthetic senses. You want them to hear the change, feel the change, confirm the change by looking at the rotor tap, and then reacting only so much as to stop the decay and move it back in a positive direction. We don't need to snap the RPM back up to 104. We just need to get it trending back up. When you get into lower RPM to the point where the warning system activates, all it's telling you is whatever you're doing right now, you need to look at RPM. That's it. You're still 7% away from the rotor RPM low limit. You're a long ways away from a real critical limit. But hey, it's time to look inside and see what you got going on. Oh, I do have low RPM. I need to get it going back in the right direction. The other night, I had the guy getting a low RPM on takeoff. I mean, light and horn, the whole works. Immediately, inside, boom, I just hooked it right back up. Huh, imagine that on takeoff. But that's it. I only did enough to get it back, moving in the right direction. Yeah. Guard against the tendency to overreact on this. Right? Settle the power. Do this into the wind. I know there's a theory out there to do them downwind. Don't do them downwind. I take my instructors out and I do these, and we get it to about 2,000 feet per minute just to show them the aircraft even at 2,000 feet per minute, doesn't do anything really scary. Just the descent rate goes through the roof. The behavior doesn't change all that much. Okay? Hold position while entering this by looking out to the side. It's pretty hard to estimate if you're moving or not by looking out in front. As you slow down prior to entering settling with power, you get the vibrations, the transverse flow effect. That's not settling with power. You got to have the 300 feet per minute and 0 airspeed to get into this. Don't dive on your cover. I see that all the time. Where the collecting barely moves, but we're in an attitude like this. Adopt about a 60 knot attitude and get the collecting down. And be patient. Just wait for it to come out of it. If you ever have settling with power just go south on you, and it happens. I know a couple of people it's happened to. Anybody had one scare them during a settling with power demonstration? The way out of this is auto rotation. If you ever have a settling with power demonstration that just, for whatever reason, goes south on you, things that start getting out of control, when you enter auto rotation, it's instantly over. Like that, you're out of it. It's amazing. Whew, that's it. I barely made it. Huh? Well, I'll tell you, long line, I do it all the time. Long line, that's a very common move. And because there's no altitude to give up, to get out of the traditional way. So in long line, lateral move, we do it all the time, and it works like a charm. So the idea is to change the airflow, is to get out of that vortex ring state that's developed.
So lateral movement is okay. Lateral.
It is. We don't normally teach it that way in primary training, but I'll tell you that long line pilots use that daily. In long line, especially production long line, like drills and logging, settling with power is an everyday occurrence. Every single day you get into it. And get into it pretty thoroughly.
Well, I get into the right of it, when I was teaching. But sometimes you have no room to go to the phone.
No, and I've done this, I can't count the number of times doing long line where I've come out of lateral. One thing I'll remind you too, that's been lost over the years, if you're flying an aircraft with abundant power, like if I'm on a long line, I start getting settling if I'm with an empty hook, you can power your way right out of settling with power. If you have enough power to create nothing but induced flow, downflowing air, come out of it like that. So that's another way out that a lot of people forget. That initially, and that's my move, like on a llama or a big machine, I immediately go to power. If I have it available, I'll power my way right out of settling with power. Because I just change the airflow to all down. That's one way out. Barely made enough time. I'm happy to answer questions. If you don't have anything to do, I'll answer plenty.
On intro flight.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got it to the S-bar.
Yeah.
Does that need to be the full S-bar before an intro flight? Or can you do an abbreviated one and just not sign them off?
Well, nothing says how thorough you have to be on that S-bar training. It says you have to cover 4 items. You have to cover those items. It doesn't say how thoroughly you have to do it. I guarantee you on the intro, it's going to go right over your heads. If they walk out of that intro briefing with nothing else but the idea that you can't do anything quick, you've done your job. And then what we typically do is once the student comes into the program as a student, we give them a more in-depth S-bar